Let's consider balancing equations. If you look at the equation shown, one of the things that you want to do is to be sure that you have the same number of atoms of each element on each side of the equation, such as calcium, oxygen, hydrogen, or chlorine. So let's look at each of those. And the best way to look at balancing an equation, at least to start, is to use what's called the accounting method. So let's count the number of atoms of each element on each side of the equation, and then we'll balance the equation from there. So let's consider calcium. And if we look at the equation, we have one calcium on each side of the equation. So calcium on each side. Now let's look at oxygen. On the reactant side of the equation, we have two oxygens. On the product equation, we have one oxygen. Let's look at hydrogens. If you look at the reactant side of the equation, we have two hydrogens plus one, that's three. If we look at the product side of the equation, we have two hydrogens. And if we look at the chlorines on each side of the equation, on the reactant side we have one, and on the product side we actually have two. So let's look at where we are to start with. We have one calcium on each side of the equation. That's a balanced equation, at least with respect to calcium. But let's look at chlorine. Chlorine, there's one chlorine on the reactant side, two chlorines on the product side. So let's balance the equation with respect to chlorine by putting a 2 in front of the hydrochloric acid. What that's going to do is it's going to multiply our hydrogens by 2, so that's going to give us now 4 hydrogens on the reactant side, but it's also going to multiply our chlorines by 2, so now that gives us 2 chlorines on each side of the equation. So let's look at where we are now. Our chlorines are balanced and our calciums are balanced. We still need to balance our oxygens and our hydrogens. So let's look at hydrogen next. We have 2 hydrogens, plus 2 is 4 on the reactant side, and we have 2 hydrogens on the product side. So let's multiply that by 2. So let's multiply that by 2. If we look at the equation now, we have 2 hydrogens times 2 is 4. So that's going to change this to a 4. And that changes our oxygens now. We have 2 oxygens on this side of the equation. So now let's see where we are. We have 1 calcium on each side, 2 oxygens on each side, 4 hydrogens on each side, and 2 chlorines on each side. So that's actually a balanced equation. The key thing that you want to look at is, do you have the same number of atoms on each side of the equation of each type of element? So basically that's the whole idea of balancing equations.